I'm getting a little lucky using free recoil and hitting these targets with this ammo. There's a clean run. Welcome back to Guns Out in Minnesota. Today, I'm going to review and discuss the BRS 4-16 by 44mm first focal plane optic sent out to the channel by Shepherd Optics. Full disclosure, I do have a little connection there. I don't get kickbacks from sales at Shepherd Optics, but I do have a connection where they're sending me some optics to let you know what I think of them, and I want to put that out front right away. Now, a few of the stats real briefly. Again, it is 4-16 by 44. It's a first focal plane, 30mm tube, 65 MOA of internal travel, 10-yard minimum parallax. It's nitrogen purged. It weighs about 23.6 ounces, not too bad, and the length is 13.8. Mine is a mil configuration optic, so each click equals 1/10 mil correction. I'm going to start off with some of the specifications and features and then finish off with what I liked about the optic. Shepherd is good about including these scope covers, these caps. Most of their optics have something like this, and they're plastic, but they're going to do the trick for keeping snow and water, and especially at matches, there's a lot of muck. A lot of times we set up our rifles barrel up on a stand and there's muck on the bipod, there might be muck on the rifle, depends how messy the stage was, but it could fall down into your lenses, so I prefer to have some sort of cap or cover on every optic if I can help it. And in the snow, I've actually had the snow so hard and I didn't have a cap on that I had to hand clean out because it was full of snow. I was shooting during a blizzard one time and I didn't have a cap on the particular scope I was shooting, so this is a good idea. This right here is your ocular focus, and it has a nice texture to it. It moves nice and smooth. The purpose of this device is to focus your reticle, so just keep that in mind. It has plenty of range of travel. If you have eye issues at all, I don't think you're going to have an issue with this. Plenty of correction there for your eye if it is a little blurry. Again, that's just for the reticle. It's not for the image. It's not for your target. It's for the reticle. Then the mag ring here, it goes from 16 power down to 4 power. And I would say the texture on this matches and it feels uniform to the other textures on the optic, but it doesn't need much. It's not overly firm or stiff, and I do not feel slack or sloppiness in the tolerances on the ring itself. That is something on older scopes you might get from time to time, is I could almost rattle the ring itself on older scopes, not necessarily from Shepherd, but maybe the scopes you grew up with. Some of those, the tolerances were a little shaky, especially if they were coming from China. This one though is nice and smooth. I can grab it and move it quickly. I think I will be using this optic, in a hunting scenario, so most of the time I'll be between 10 power. I might back off for field of view real quick, and I might want to spot for somebody up to 16 power, but it's a very versatile range. And like I said, that reticle, there's so much field of view, there's so much ability to see a lot of the reticle that I can actually push it up a little bit and still see pretty much as I'm going to use for this 22. This optic does not have a zero stop. I'm not overly concerned about that because it has a very good functional reticle. No matter what caliber I put it on, I think it's a very functional reticle. Makes a lot of sense. But if you did need to dial, or you prefer to dial, these are lift to operate. So on the trail or in my gun bag, or if I hand it to my buddy, I don't worry about these slipping on their own. The lift is not an overly high lift, but it requires a little effort. So I don't think it's going to happen on its own and I'm going to lose my zero or anything. The actual clicks themselves are not the really crunchy style. They're more of the style that has just a slight bit of backlash in it. But remember, the feel does not necessarily translate to tracking trustworthiness. I've actually had some optics that had a real nice clicky tactile feel, but weren't machined well, didn't have reliability in the turrets. And so that's not necessarily a sign that this isn't going to track well or anything like that. In fact, most optics like this with this style of design, they still track reasonably well as long as you're not pushing them to their extreme ends of range, which many optics have issues when that happens anyways. I'll take my mic off and give you a listen. I would say they're still audible, just not quite as loud as some of the other Shepherd optics. They have maybe just a little bit more tactile feel, such as the BRS 1 to 8. It feels a little more tactile. It's a little more dry, less squishy, less backlash on that model. But again, I'm not overly worried about it, especially for something like this where I primarily am going to focus on holdovers because of the way the optic is set up. All right, so I wanted to show you the illumination on setting 6 in some bright sun. So I'm basically looking into a very well lit, bright, sunny area, and I'm on 16 power right now. I can cycle through the illumination here. So there's off in between, and there's level 5. Okay, level 5 is a little dim. So I think everything else is going to be a little dim for that extreme of a brightness setting. So let me go back to 6. 6 looks pretty close to daylight bright, and I would actually say it's contrasting decently to my eye, even though I've got some brush very close here, and contrast is going to be difficult because of the parallax with something so close. But I'm looking at a pretty bright illumination setting, and it does illuminate the whole reticle. So if you needed to do holdovers and you were shooting at dusk at long range and you did not want to dial, you could trust that you'll be able to see the rest of your reticle there. The center dot is plenty well illuminated, and obviously that's the part I want to use the most often. If I'm using illumination, chances are I'm probably using the center of the reticle and not holding over to extreme distances. But it's there for you, and if I wanted to just bring it down to 4 power for a second. So there's 4 power in daylight. Not going to be quite bright enough. And that's asking a lot, in my opinion. I'm going to adjust the parallax here for a second. I think that's asking a whole lot of an optic to be daylight bright with a scope like this. A red dot is one thing, maybe a prism sight is one thing, but when it comes to magnified optics like this, I think it's a lot to ask of an optic to be daylight bright, truly daylight bright. Let me move up to 16 power again and refocus. There's 16 power, and as you can see, the reticle contrasts nicely even with that really bright sun again. Taking a look at the actual illumination knob, like I said earlier, I was able to look into a fairly bright area, and on level 6 there was contrast there. I could pick up the red. All the other settings weren't quite bright enough for the very bright day that I've been having, but 6 could do it. I would say that's the closest to daylight bright that most people are going to need. Otherwise, all the other settings are going to work just fine for dusk, early morning, or night vision if you need to go down to 1. The knob itself has an aggressive texture on it. I think that's a good idea, especially being in Minnesota. Sometimes I need to wear gloves, and I need that aggressive texture so I can grab onto it and move it. It's not extra firm, and I don't believe it's going to provide me any trouble even when it gets cold. And generally things are a little bit more difficult to move and navigate on a scope when it's very cold out, including parallax. So the parallax also has that aggressive texture. I appreciate that. I'm going to say the force it takes to move the parallax is not on the really firm side, and it's not on the really loose, sloppy side either, which is good. You don't want it on either extreme. I would say it's more towards the in-between. It's a intentional effort. It's not going to move under recoil. It's not going to move by accident, that's for sure. But it's not hard to move. I like that it has this texture on there, though. If it's very, very cold out, I tend to shoot even into the sub-zero temperatures. Everything gets a little more firm and difficult to move. The lubricity isn't the same. So it goes down from a little under 10 yards. And you have 15, 25, 50, 100. Okay, you're probably going to zero there, so there's a 100 marker and identifier. 200, 300, 500, and infinity. And being that it's a 22, I really like that it goes down to 10 yards. The thing that is nice about that is you could put it on an air gun, you could put it on a center fire or rim fire. You could level your rifle at home and also bore sight it. You could do all the things you need to because you have a 10-yard parallax. So you could pretty much set it up from one end of the house to the other with a plumb line and get a good feel for your guess at a zero. It'll save you some ammo. I think, yeah, 10 and 15 yards as a minimum. This just needs to be the standard for most optics going forward. It adds to the versatility of every optic. All right, you'll have to bear with me. I have taken my bolt out of my rifle and done just a general kind of eyeball zero. And now I'm going to go ahead and get it dialed in where I think it ought to be. So it's going to take me a minute. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. About right there. It's not too far off. That's pretty good for eyeballing it. So it looks like if I measure with the reticle, which Shepard optics, all of them are great for measuring things with reticles. They're kind of designed that way. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get to my exposed turrets. And it looks to me like from the center where I was holding, I can go 1, 2 tenths, and then windage. Make sure I go the right way here. Other way. Looks like 4 tenths. So that should put me pretty close to center if I can pull the trigger behind the camera properly. That's usually the trick here, guys, is when you're shooting through one of these cameras, it's not particularly easy to zero, but we'll see where it goes. Okay, I'm going to send one more. So those two are on top of each other. I'm going to guess that I can come back a little bit. Let's just go about that much more and see what happens here. Give myself a fresh target. Something a little smaller. So those two are about on top of each other. What I'm going to do to finish out my zeroing here is I got to take the camera off, and I'm just going to have it shouldered, because as I'm shooting right now, it's not actually shouldered, believe it or not. It's pretty much free recoil. And to get an efficient zero, I need to have the rifle mounted up to my shoulder. I'll take off the camera, confirm a zero, but you can see the process is really, really easy. It doesn't take long at all. The reticle does exactly what it needs to do, and the scope is tracking over just fine. All right, I've got a target here at 50 yards. And I'm going to go out of focus on 4 power and then into focus. Just to show you that parallax does make a big difference, an awfully big difference, and you'll see it a lot more at heavy magnification. So there's what the reticle is going to look like at 4 power. And let's move it up. Here's 5, 6, 7. I'm going to skip up to 10. There's 10 power. Really nice, clear reticle. They did a great job. As far as the reticle design, you can see that there are some different values there. There's some different figures we'll talk about later, but those are going to help you in estimation or in actual mil data. There's 12 power. 14. You can still see a decent amount of the reticle. 16 power. That's max magnification right there. And I'm going to back off just a little bit so you can see how far down you can actually see. So 10 mils is what I can still see in the reticle on 16 power. That gives me a lot of holdover. I'm actually sort of impressed at the amount of holdover I can still get on 16 power. That's not bad at all. It is extreme. It is at the very bottom of the reticle, and that's not ideal. I think most people would agree with that. It's not ideal to completely go to the bottom of your reticle. Most glass is optimized towards the center of the glass. Distortions can come up in the edges of glass, and if you're not shooting some of the more premium optics that Shepard makes, yeah, the edges of the glass might not be quite as good as the center of the glass, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's not going to make too much of a difference at relatively close ranges. I'm not concerned about that, actually, and this is a very functional reticle. Me, myself, I'm probably not going to be shooting it on 16 power very often. Since I have it on a rimfire, my guess is for NRL 22 competitions and hunting, I'm going to be between 10 power, so there's 10 power. And 10 power looks really, really good. Can see the full value of the reticle. That's very, very cool that I can see so much field of view at 10 power. And then very often, if If I'm scanning looking for critters or hunting, I'm going to be closer to like 6 or 7 power, and this is 7 power right there. Great shot of the reticle. To my eye, that center dot is going to do really well, I think, in a hunting or target practice scenario. This may seem small to your eye because it's through a phone camera, but to my eye, that center dot is actually, pretty visible. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit like that. That's really the perception I'm getting there on 7 power. So that center dot is plenty big enough, but it's not going to obscure the target. And I don't feel that the thickness of the reticle is obscuring the target either. You can see that fly down there. Maybe I should be going for that right now. So here's 200 yards in the wind. Impact. Little left. Impact. Again, the rifle is not even shouldered. This is just free recoiling. Not too difficult on the 8-inch and 10-inch. Another impact. Those are relatively generous sized targets at 200 yards, but making hits no problem with those holdovers. As you can see here, I don't see much for tunneling at all. Very minimal amounts. And the eye box is not getting, it's hardly even changing. Between 4 and 16 power, that eye box is pretty forgiving actually. Yeah, that looks pretty comfortable. Not bad. And here again is 16 power. We're at about 40 yards to that right there. That's what it's going to look like. Again, illuminated on level 6. Go ahead and turn that off for a second, just so you can see contrast. Headshot. There is a lot to like about this optic, but the thing that I'm going to be focusing on in a lot of my conversation is the reticle, because the reticle is what I look at. And so the image and the reticle are kind of like my two main things I want to know about right now. And with image, I'm going to say I was kind of surprised. Did pretty well. You know, the fact that I can see all 14, 15 mils. See, I can see 15 mils, and I'm on about 11.9 power. Bring it down to a decimal. I can see even up to 12, right at the bottom there, just about. Really great field of view was accomplished with this optic. And the brightness, let's see, the brightness is pretty good. I like that the colors are decent. And I don't see a lot of, let's see, I don't see a lot of CA around the edges. It looks, like I said, it looks pretty decent. I think the structure of this Christmas tree, it's a little unique, and I kind of like that. It's not just like every other one out there, but it's not causing my eye to have to really work for it, or my mind isn't having to really work for understanding what I'm looking at. It all seems pretty straightforward, but it's not overly busy and complex. I do like reticles that can transfer over into the hunting world pretty well. If they're overly busy or complex, or information that isn't really clear and you're not sure what the values are, you'll probably forget it, especially in a hunting scenario where we have to make a quick shot. And so I just like the values to be simple and really quick. I think 2/10 breakups, it's pretty common. A lot of people are using that, and not obscuring the target for windage is becoming more and more essential for me in optics. I really like the way that these windage dots, every other line is different for windage. Down the elevation stadia, out in the windage area there, you have some smaller 10th markers, and then the next line down is going to be windage dots that don't have the smaller markers. They're just going to be the full, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mil markers out into the windage. And that makes a lot of sense to me, especially the way that I shoot, and it doesn't go too extreme. It doesn't go too wide, all the way out there to a place where it's just barely, even practical. I think this is a very functional reticle, and I'm going to go ahead and take a few shots. That's pretty good. That may not be a 56 millimeter objective, but let me tell you, if an optic is designed well, the 56 millimeter objective, it's an ideal, but it may not be worth the weight and the size all the time. In an optic that is configured this way for these purposes, I'm going to say they went with the right size for the objective, and the image is bright, and that's kind of the main thing. It's not just the size and the dimensions of your scope, it's more, does it do what it needs to do? And so for this optic, I'm going to say it absolutely does what it needs to do. I did not think that the image got overly dark as I was going up to 16 power, and as I was actually shooting this in comps and stuff, I didn't think that the image got dark, and I was pretty happy with it. Low light performance, pretty darn decent, especially considering the price point. Now, I'm aware not everybody may prefer the BRS mill reticle that I chose. I think it's a very, very good reticle. I chose to talk about it a lot in this review because I think it is the standout feature of this optic. It's my preferred feature, and it's the thing you're going to look at the most. And so it has to work, and if it does work, then they deserve some praise. So I'm going to tell Shepard, hey, really good job on the reticle. I like that design. I like the configuration here, and I think for an NRL base class, like NRL 22 base class, or NRL Hunter even for that matter, this is a 30 millimeter tube. It's relatively light. I think this would fit for those configurations really nicely, and it's going to get you out, again, really far with the 15 mils of holdover technically. Now, if you didn't want it in this configuration, and you still really wanted to run it on a 22, they actually have developed something called the BRS 22LR reticle. So it's this optic, but it's got a ballistically compensated reticle there that they've designed. That's very cool. Then they have the BRS-1 reticle, the BRS-1A reticle, the BRS-1C reticle, and the BRS-2 reticle. If you're familiar with those, if you're not, head over to their website because it's going to introduce you to a whole new world of optics and reticles and holdover designs. Possibly even send you over to the DRS series. The DRS series, which is the dual reticle series, is kind of the bread and butter of Shepard Optics. It's something that they take very, very seriously. They have a lot of pride in, and some of those other reticles are very popular because of the DRS series. But this is a good configuration here. I like mill optics, and I like using mill optics in a holdover fashion. I think they can be really fast if you are good with your data and you know what you are doing and what your rifle is going to do with that ammo combination and those elements. So it can be a little bit more work. If that sounds like too much to you, maybe go for one of the ballistically calculated holdover type reticles. It could be something that is right up your alley. I'm going to tell you that this optic performed well for me. I liked the image that I had. I know it's not as high dollar as some of their other optics, and you might be somebody who has a little higher budget. Perhaps this is just a little lower than you were actually wanting to spend, and you want a little bit better glass or a few more features perhaps. I'm going to suggest go watch one of these videos right here that I reviewed. These are also optics from Shepherd Optics, and I have more reviews coming in the next couple months, and you should stay tuned because I might drop a video of something that will interest you, and there could be some good sales coming.